the three main Crysis games all came to the Switch. Of course, we're missing the pseudo sequel for the PC, but
Hmm.
hey, the rest is here. Crysis 1, 2, and 3, and it's freaking good. It's so good, in fact, that in some ways, especially Crysis 1, there's
Yes.
elements of the Crysis 1 port where the guys up in Sweden porting this did a better job than the guys doing the PS4 Xbox One version. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like they
Yeah.
made choices about the visuals that actually allow it to exceed that other version. So yeah, I mean, so basically for this, Crytek worked with Saber Interactive, and they worked with both Saber in Sweden and then I think more of Eastern European Saber. So it was actually a combination of the two. But the reason this is so impressive really comes down to the fact that Crysis 1 still does things that we don't really see much in games today. Like the sheer volume of like physicalized assets that react to forces around them, buildings that blow apart, trees that knock down, things splinter and break and just behave in a way that makes the world feel extremely alive. And each map is just massive and intricately designed. And, I feel like we don't get that often. And, Crysis is not an open world game. It has maps that feel like an open world, but it's all very carefully crafted level design.
Hmm.
And it did eventually get a port to PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, but those versions run terribly. They barely work. Like it's
Hmm.
there, but so many sacrifices were made to bring it to those machines to the point where it just doesn't really feel great. When bringing this to the Switch, not only do they, so it does still share some of those limitations because it was derived from the CryEngine 3 version of Crysis 1, but
Right.
they actually improved things. Like they brought Svogi over, the sparse voxel
Hmm.
global illumination solution that they came up with, right? That's in there. So
Yes.
you actually get real like light bounce and GI in the game world, which is beyond what even the original PC version has. So there's like enhanced lighting and effects and stuff like that in there. The motion blurs in. Like the maps are all like there and non-compromised in terms of design. It's absolutely nuts. And on top of all that, it actually manages to run not perfectly, but pretty darn well,
Hmm.
while even maintaining things like, I think it wasn't there initially, but then they added back in parallax occlusion maps, if I recall,
Oh.
and various other things like that. They continue to update it. And in the end, the Switch version, I think, is just, it's a stunning conversion, especially
Yeah.
Crysis 1.
Yeah. I think looking at these games, the first and second have a lot of commonality in the way they were treated. So you have Svogi in both those titles, which makes the lighting, like you said, look a good deal richer and more realistic. In Crysis 1, it has a lot of impact in the trees and
Right.
around buildings. In Crysis 2, it's just all over the place because you're like
Yeah.
under underpasses in
Yep. Yep.
buildings,
Yep.
lots of
Yep.
complex
It's
geometry that
everywhere.
really shows that off. Whereas in like Crysis 2 on the original like PS3 360 PC, it just looked like super blue in the indirectly lit areas, in the shadowed
Extremely.
regions. Yeah. Here, it just looks a lot better. And they've also implemented, I think, critically, great looking TAA, which really helps clean up the image here, really makes the games look nice and smooth and stable
Right.
on
Yes. Good
Switch.
point.
And not like the really crappy TA that was in the original console version of Crysis 2, like really good TA
Ugh.
here.
Yeah.
And then,
Actual
yeah, the
good
games
TA.
run really well. I think the exceptions would be like, I don't know, there's some frame pacing issues.
Yeah. 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 Not
And
unexpected.
yeah. And there's some frame rate drops in like Crysis 1 in certain areas, like that early battle with the tanks in that little town,
It's a pretty heavy one, then.
that are just like impossible to overcome. The single threaded performance of the Switch is not going to cope too well with that, I can't imagine.
No. No. No.
But yeah, I think if you want to touch on Crysis 3 for a bit, I think it's a little bit less exciting, but also quite compelling on its own terms.
I mean, I think Crysis 3 is pretty much as good as the other ones. It's just that
Uh-huh.
Crysis 3 itself saw pretty big improvements across the board,
Right.
um, even on the consoles of last gen. And this
Mhm.
ends up looking more like that with less like major improvements, but it still runs better overall, and the image quality is much better.
Yes.
Uh, Rich's favorite benchmark point, the highly explosive materials section, is fully intact. Um, I mean, it looks like Crysis 3 and it's running on a small handheld. What more do you want, right?
Yeah. I
And
think
again,
Crysis 3 is in a position where the original lighting still looks great. Doesn't need huge upgrades. Svogi would have been cool, obviously, but here they took a little bit of a lighter touch with Crysis 3, which I think
agree.
is an appropriate choice. And they still do have like TA in there. It is still cleaned up. Does still look a lot better than the game looked on 360 and PS3. Is still running a lot more consistently than it did on those
smoother.
consoles.
Windows consoles were basically mostly around 20 FPS in this game, which feels terrible. And Switch is more or less a fairly stable 30 with some frame pacing hiccups here and there.
Yeah.
Which honestly looks pretty good. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think the key here with all three of these games is that they actually managed to bring the full Crysis experience to a portable little system like the Switch with that tiny little power draw that it has. And that is just mind blowing to me. The fact that it works as well as it does. So bravo to Saber, Crytek and all that. I guess I should also, remind, of course, that Alex and I did contribute a little bit to these projects when they were being worked on to try to help make them become as best as they could. But it was just it was a fun little thing to do on the side. But I'm really happy with how they turned out.